Thank you. All right, well, thank you, everybody, for coming. And can everyone in the back hear me? You can hear? If there's any problems and I'm not speaking loud enough, just raise your hand or let me know or shout something out. So thanks again for coming. Thanks for inviting me to come here. People have asked me, is this your first trip to Nebraska? But I was born in Chicago, and my aunt and uncle and all my cousins lived in Omaha. So we used to spend summers traveling, coming to Nebraska, and I haven't been here probably in about 20 years. And when I first came here, it had nothing to do with immigration. But I'm happy to be back. My family's happy that I'm here visiting Nebraska. So I think that we're in for a good day of a lot of information about immigration issues for kids in juvenile court. The real hope, I think, is for me to provide you with a lot of information that I'm not going to expect, or you shouldn't expect yourself to become an expert on immigration, or that everything I tell you, you're going to remember. If you take a look at the materials, you're going to see that there's a PowerPoint printout, and it's really long. There's tons of information that we're going to go over today. And certainly, as I'm talking to you, if there are things that I'm saying that are confusing or questions you have, again, definitely feel free to raise your hand during the presentation and let me know, because chances are that if there's something that you don't understand or you have a question about, you're probably not the only person in the room who has that question. And immigration, maybe in some ways like juvenile court, is filled with acronyms. It's filled with sort of shorthand, and I use shorthand and acronyms all day in my work. And so I may slip into those kind of references that you may not get. And so definitely, raise your hand and let me know, and I'll make sure that I explain those kind of things. So the point today is not to make you experts on immigration or feel that you have to be experts on immigration. But the real hope is that what I can do through the information I'm going to share is for you to understand that it's important to realize that in cases where you have families, whether they're parents or children, who are not US citizens, that there probably are some immigration issues that are going to come up in the cases, or there are immigration consequences to what happens in the cases. And so it's really to try to sensitize you to the issue of immigration in juvenile court, for you to realize there may be roles, and I know that there are people here, attorneys, judges, caseworkers, I think we have an interpreter, people who have all different roles in the juvenile court system. But for you to realize that each of you working in the juvenile court has some role to play in helping to serve and improve situations for immigrant families in the juvenile court system. And particularly, I think, for caseworkers, you'll see that I'm going to talk a lot about different immigration benefits for youth who are in the juvenile court system. And caseworkers and attorneys may see that actually helping to address the immigration issues for children may make a lot of the rest of your job much easier. That you may find that having an undocumented child who's in the juvenile court system may raise a whole host of issues, from benefits to concerns about removal or deportation, that if you can link up with someone who can help the child with their immigration issues, your life and the child's life may be much easier. So again, the focus today will be primarily on kids, immigrant children in the juvenile court system. But I recognize that a lot of you are working on cases with families whose the parents of the children may have immigration issues as well. They may not be US citizens. So I'll try to weave in concerns or issues that may come up even if you have a US citizen child, but maybe the parents of the child are undocumented or aren't citizens, and they may have immigration issues as well. So a little bit about the kind of work that I do. I've been an attorney at Public Counsel for going on 6 years now, and my primary focus has always been on the intersection of juvenile court and immigration, and representing kids in the juvenile court system who qualify for some immigration benefits. So I probably represented maybe 300 or more children who qualify for special immigrant juvenile status, which is something that we're going to talk about today for a couple hours in the morning. I've worked with kids who qualify for other kinds of immigration benefits we'll talk about in the afternoon. I've helped kids in what we call the dependency system, but what I understand here are called abuse neglect cases, or 3A cases. I've worked with kids in the delinquency system, with kids in the probate court or guardianships and adoptions. So most of the things that I'm going to talk to you about today are things I've done a fair amount of research about, but they're also the things that I'll try to explain are really insights and ideas that I've had through working on real individual cases with kids who are struggling with immigration issues. And for kids from as young, I think my youngest client was maybe 18 months, up to 18, 19, 20 years old. So I've seen a range of ages and kids from different backgrounds. In addition, I teach the immigration law clinic at UCLA, so I'm sort of working with a lot of students who are interested in immigration issues, and then do these kind of trainings around the country. I do some in California, but I've done similar trainings in Indiana and New Mexico. And so part of the reason I have my contact information up here is that you should definitely feel free to see me as a resource for cases that you have or issues that come up, not just this week or next week, but 2 years from now, I'll probably still be a public counsel, and you can always call me. Last night, actually, at the hotel, I was checking my voicemail, and I got a voicemail from a woman in New Mexico with a question about an immigration case, and I think I did my training there like maybe 3 years ago. And then 2 weeks ago, I got a call from a woman in Indiana who was working on a special immigrant juvenile case, and I had done a training there about 2 years ago. So the issues of kids and juvenile court immigration are not going away, and years to come, you and I may still be working on these things. So you should always feel free to give me a call if you have questions. I've tried to educate myself relatively well on Nebraska juvenile law and on the kind of terms or lingo that you guys use here. So I'm going to try to be Nebraska accurate in my talk, and if you have very Nebraska state-specific questions 2 years from now, I may not be as up on the law as I am now. But certainly, I'll always be willing to answer questions or try to direct you to resources that may help you with your cases. So why don't we do everybody has a green folder? Yes, okay. So why don't you pull it out, and we're going to take a look at a couple things. I want to make sure everyone has, this is the printout of the PowerPoint, and I think most of you should be able to see it pretty well from where you're sitting. But it's here for you if you prefer to read along, but also here as a note-taking guide, so feel free to use that. There's a pink and a blue paper. This is not going to be a test, but in the afternoon we're going to break out into pairs to talk about some hypotheticals. So one of the pages, the pink one, is going to be about different immigration benefits from kids, and you're going to get to try to figure out, if you had this particular client, what in the world can anyone do? And then the blue paper is for immigration consequences of juvenile delinquency dispositions. So we're going to have some time in the afternoon where we're going to break out and talk about those hypos. The other thing that's in the packet is this set of materials, and it's Immigration Issues for Children, Juvenile Court, and if you take a look at it, it has a lot of samples. I've blacked out the faces of my former clients. And so definitely have this out, because one of the things that we'll do is, as we go through the PowerPoint, I'm going to direct you to the materials, because one of the things that I've found is that I can sit up here all day and talk about what a green card looks like, but if you've never seen a lawful permanent resident card, it might really be helpful to take a look at one. You might have a child who comes into your office with one, and you think maybe you know what it is, but sometimes if you see one in real life, it'll help. So just make sure you have these materials out, because I'm going to refer to those. And then we also have the agenda, and I am going to try to stick pretty close to the agenda, but invariably there may be topics that take longer than we anticipate because people have a lot of questions, but it's a lot of information. So my hope actually is to try to, this morning, cover things in such a way that I may be able to cover at least one of the topics, a short topic from the afternoon before we break for lunch. So you have the agenda as the guide, but we may vary and kind of swerve off the agenda a little bit. Now again, like I mentioned, I hunted down some of you in the audience, but I'd really like to encourage you to ask questions during the presentation. I think that it breaks things up for everyone. It gives me a break from talking, and also it'll help me to know if there are things that I'm not being clear about, but also if there are topics or questions that you have, things that I may not be covering that are of interest to you or that you see as recurring issues in your cases. Definitely feel free to raise your hand. And again, no one is going to be, your face will not be on the video, and I'm going to be repeating your questions. So don't feel constrained in the kind of things you want to know because we're videotaping. Also, don't feel constrained by fear that you don't want to look like you don't know something you should know. Because the reality is that immigration is really complicated, that no questions are going to be dumb questions, and that I'm presuming right now that I'm presuming zero knowledge of immigration for everyone in the room. And the reality may be that some of you may have a fair amount of knowledge about immigration. I know that for a couple of people, I think coming to training tomorrow, there are people who are actually immigration specialists, so they have a lot of knowledge. But I'm presuming zero knowledge about immigration. So what we're going to do for about the first hour is I'm going to go over immigration terms, and I'm going to talk about the organization of the immigration system, and also about what are different kinds of immigration status. So what's a U.S. citizen? How are you a U.S. citizen? What does it mean to be a lawful permanent resident? What does it mean to be undocumented? That way, when we go on to later parts of the presentation that are about immigration benefits, hopefully we'll all be operating from the same base level of knowledge about what the terms mean. So that'll be the first part of the presentation. Then we're going to talk about special immigrant juvenile status, which is a benefit an immigration benefit for kids in the juvenile court system. And it's only for kids in the juvenile court system. And so I'm going to we have about 2 hours slotted out to talk about that. We may end up doing a little bit less. But it's a really important benefit to know about. There may not be thousands of kids that you come in contact who are going to be eligible, but for the ones who are, it's a really important immigration benefit, and it has a really important juvenile court role. Without actions by the juvenile court, the child can't be eligible for this relief. So we're going to spend a fair amount of time on special immigrant juvenile status. Then we'll have a break for lunch, and in the afternoon we're covering a whole range of things. In addition to special immigrant juvenile status, I'm also going to talk about other kinds of immigration relief that are available for children in the juvenile court system. I'm not going to do comprehensive, every possible kind of immigration relief, but I'm going to try to cover the kinds of immigration relief that you most commonly find for children who've been abused, abandoned, neglected, because there are special immigration benefits for them. But a thing that's important to know is that even though in the afternoon the examples I'll use will be for children, most of those immigration benefits are also available for adults. So for those of you who represent parents in juvenile court proceedings, or those of you who are caseworkers or judges or people who are sort of trying to look at cases of a family as a whole, you may actually find that there may be entire families that qualify for immigration benefits through the kind of programs I'll talk about in the afternoon. We're going to do our hypotheticals on the immigration benefits, and then I'll switch into talking about the immigration consequences of juvenile delinquency dispositions. And we'll spend maybe an hour talking about that, and then also talking about some hypotheticals. You could spend 2 or 3 days having a seminar on the immigration consequences of adult criminal convictions. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that, but I do recognize that for some youth, 16, 17-year-old kids who have cases in adult court, people who are representing them probably will need additional training on adult criminal convictions, and I'll provide some resources on that. Once we cover the delinquency issues, then I will give a brief overview of immigration holds and also the removal proceedings for immigrant children, but also for their parents. And I think that it seems to me that from talking to people, there are recurring situations where you have parents of children who end up in the juvenile court system who are in deportation or removal proceedings. And so I'll give an overview of the proceedings as they relate to kids, but I'll also point out how the proceedings work for parents. So for those of you who are in a case where you have a parent who may be detained by the Immigration Service and you're trying to figure out, are they going to be released, are they going to be deported, I'll try to go over that as well. Then I'll talk about some new immigration legislation that's passed recently. And Vicki mentioned that it's a good time to have this training. And from my perspective, part of the reason it's a good time is because there have been recent changes to federal immigration law that affect kids in juvenile court. And so that only happened in the end of December of last year. So you're on the cutting edge in terms of timing. It's really good. If you had had this training 6 months ago, someone would need to be retraining you on a lot of these topics. So, so I'll cover that legislation. And then at the end, I also have, I've called pretty much every legal service, immigration legal services provider in the state of Nebraska and talk to them about what kind of services they provide. And so I've created a list of immigration agencies and the kind of cases that they handle. And part of the reason that I do that is because it's great for me to get up here and talk to you about all these immigration issues and benefits for kids. But the reality is that if what we're trying to do is help you to see why immigration issues are important in these cases, it can be very frustrating if I give you all this information and then the question is, well, where do I turn? If I identify a child who's eligible for relief, or if I have a parent who's in removal proceedings and needs a lawyer, where do I go? And so what I've tried to do is put together a whole list of resources, of places that you can turn for people with immigration experience who can help on your cases. And so there's a long listing of those. In the PowerPoint after the resource part, you're going to see that I have some additional information there. One section is on organizing programs for serving immigrant kids and immigration benefits in juvenile court. And then the second part is just more general information on working with immigrant families. And the working with immigrant families part is very short, but the reality is that that itself is a whole topic that, that could use additional training for everyone who works in juvenile court, because it doesn't just relate to what kind of immigration benefits do people qualify for, but it talks about different issues including language competency, stressors that may come out in the family because of their concerns about immigration issues. So I'll try to cover that as well. But certainly if I don't get to those topics in detail, at least you'll have the PowerPoint and you'll have the information there to check out when the presentation is done. So that is the overview for the day. It's ambitious. We'll try to cover everything. But again, the PowerPoint is very detailed, so if there are things we just don't get to, at least you can leave the presentation with the information. Now, does anyone have any questions about overview, materials, before we get going? No? Okay. All right, so